City Council work session for Monday, July the 6th, 2020. We only have one, but a major item on the agenda tonight, and we will see a presentation provided to us by Chief Jan Zimmerman. Mr. Fearborn, do you want to start us off?
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm going to start us off by turning this over to Chief Zimmerman to make her presentation this evening.
Thank you, sir.
Seems like a safe bet. Well, thank you, Your Honor, and thank you, Mr. Fearborn, for this opportunity to talk to you all tonight about the police department. Hopefully, I will be able to navigate my way through the technology, but we'll see about that. I'm going to be talking tonight, obviously, about the policies, practices, and procedures within the police department, but I at least want to introduce myself and tell you all a little bit about me. For those of you in the room who don't know me, I've been here in Raymore as the chief for 8 years. So, it took me about 5 of those years to stop calling myself the new chief, because I'm obviously not the new chief anymore. But I spent 32 years with the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department and retired from there as a major. I had the opportunity, all throughout my career in Kansas City to work a variety of different places, mostly urban assignments. I worked at East Patrol, Central Patrol, Metro Patrol is where I actually broke in when I got out of the academy, which used to be the 63rd Street Station. Now it's off of 75th. But those opportunities that were afforded to me in Kansas City to work closely with the community was where I found the thing that I think I loved the most, was being out in the community and working with people who were trying to make their neighborhoods better. And so when I got around to my last assignment with Kansas City, where I was in charge of the people in computers, I decided it was probably time for me to go. Computers were not my strong suit, but I also felt like my strength really did lie with working with the community, and that's what I wanted to do. And so I found this opportunity as Mayor Turnbow was ready to leave and move on to bigger and better things, that the city of Raymore was looking for a chief, and that's when I decided that I wanted to come and take a look at trying this thing of being a chief and working with the community again. I do want to say, I want to preface my presentation tonight with a disclaimer. The things I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to be talking about a lot. All of the things that we do within the operation of the police department. But it's all going to be things that have happened since I've been here. I couldn't, I have found that my two captains, their memories are kind of short, and so I probably should have interviewed you about all the things that happened before I came. So when I'm talking about the things that we're doing and the things that have happened, they're things that have happened since I've been here. But with that said, this was a great department. It was a great department before I got here, and that's why it was such an attractive, place for me to want to come and interview. And I will tell you all, because you're residents and you're members of this community, and Mr. Fearborn could probably speak to this a little bit better. When I applied for this job out here, there were 65 applicants to be the chief here in Raymore, and that's the reason. The reason for that is because it's such a great community and it's such a great department, and I think that people from all across the country, not just locally, but all across the country, were interested in leading this police department because it was such a great opportunity. So I recognize that it was a great opportunity for me, and being able to stay here in the metropolitan area. So let me tell you a little bit about the organization. And hopefully you can find a screen that's easy to look at here. But you see how the police department is organized, basically into 2 different divisions, and those divisions are commanded by a captain in each of those cases. The captain of the operations division, who leads both the patrol officers and then the detectives, the investigators, the school youth community outreach officer, and all those things that are more operational, on the street. That's Captain Wilson, for those of you who know things about the department. And then the support division captain, who is all the other support elements within the police department, such as animal control, obviously our dispatchers, our communications unit, those folks, records clerk, and all of those folks that provide the support to the patrol officers and the detectives. And then we actually made a change after I came here. When I first started, I was the emergency management director, and then that person reported to me. That is now a director level position, but he still reports to me. So emergency management is still, because it works in such close concert with the police department, emergency management is still considered a part of the police department. So I'm going to tell on somebody who's actually in the room here, but I've been asked this question more than once, but I've been asked by a number of minority individuals, both here in Raymore and in Kansas City when I was there for all those years, why aren't there more police officers who look like me? And to be honest with you, I don't have an answer for that. I know we try really hard. We are, constantly looking for those outstanding candidates, those people who will help us diversify our police department, those individuals who will meet the standards of the level of service that we want to provide to our community. But it's a hard question that's got an even harder answer. I can tell you in Kansas City that minority and female officers were in high demand for assignments to specialized units like undercover or detective or those kind of specialized elements that needed the diversity so that they could deal with victims of color and individuals that they came in contact with. So ultimately what would happen in Kansas City, and I'm not saying that this is the case here in Raymore, but what would happen is those individuals would be taken into those specialized units. I know I did it when I was the commander of narcotics, or I was the commander of a number of specialized units that, I was looking for those outstanding minority and female officers or detectives to come into those specialized units. So what would ultimately happen is the people that were left out on the street were white male officers mostly. And so that's a very legitimate question, from our minority community is, where are the minorities? Where are the minority officers and the female officers, and why do we not see them out on the street when we come in contact with your police department? I felt that this was important. I have the greatest respect for Police Chief David Brown, who was in Dallas when the officers were killed there and is now the chief in Chicago. And it gets to the heart of what the issue is of hiring minorities and finding minority candidates, to come to work for the police department. I will tell you, and you'll hear me repeat this tonight, during my presentation, that police work's not a popular thing to do right now. And so, finding anyone these days is difficult. And so, for us to, and we have changed significantly. Our way of recruiting, our way of testing, our way of processing candidates to try and make it easier for individuals to come and process. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But finding those individuals is difficult. And, we're looking for any and all help that we can get from anyone that can help us, find that perfect candidate that's going to be an asset to our police department, but also an asset to our community. This is just a picture, basically, of the test manual that we use. IO, which is Industrial Organizational Solutions, is a company out of Illinois that was contracted by the New Haven, Connecticut Police Department the City of New Haven, Connecticut in 2008 for $100,000 to develop a test that was completely free of racial bias. And these individuals, they were called a high-stakes diversity testing firm, but it was necessary, and it continues to be necessary, to make sure that the testing doesn't have an adverse impact on minority candidates. And so this is the test that we use. We use the IO Solutions National Criminal Justice Officer Selection Inventory, which you see there. And the metric has suggested by the EEOC that the adverse impact ratio says that the test is valid. And I'll tell you, and I'll repeat it again probably later, that the problem is not individuals passing this test. The problem is getting individuals to apply. And so, you know, we haven't found any adverse impact with this test. And so this test in particular is looking at both integrity and general knowledge sections, but it's been deemed valid for entry-level police officer. And they test a variety of other professions too, not just police officers, but this is what we use. And thanks to the hard work by our HR department, Mr. Ike, the application is now completed online. And as I mentioned before, what we did several years ago, we changed our process to streamline it and make it more applicant-friendly. We're now able to conduct, we give the test, it's done online, you know, here at the police department, proctored by a member of the command staff, and then the test is scored immediately online by IO. Once the individual successfully passes that test, we're able to conduct the computer voice stress analysis, which is our version of a polygraph, and then the interview immediately following that passage of the CVSA. This is really helpful for individuals who come to us from out of town. And so we're able to conduct that entire process in a day, whereas previously we had to bring people back time and time again in order to have them pass all the tests and do all the testing that's required. As I mentioned, you know, our problem never seems to be individuals passing that test. The problem that we have found is, you know, individuals not applying. See here the eligibility for licensing in the state of Missouri. And all of this information and a lot of other information I'm going to talk about tonight can be found in the state statutes. We follow the revised statutes of the state of Missouri for everything with regard to peace officer standards and training, what is required in order to become a peace officer in Missouri. And so I felt like it was important for, you know, folks to know exactly what the requirements are if you've got somebody that's interested in becoming a police officer. The post-certified training academies in the Kansas City area are the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department Academy, which is where I went, and a couple of our officers that I'll talk about a little bit later also attended there. The Blue River Academy, where we have a number of people who work for us that have attended, and then the Cass County Academy, which is a more recent addition, because post-certification is a fairly rigorous certification process, and so in order for a training academy to become certified, it's a pretty involved process. So Cass County is the more recent of those. When I came to Raymore in April of 2012, there were no minority officers that were working here. They had been previously, but none of them had remained. And I think anybody could tell you, you know, I certainly can tell you about, you know, some of the minority police officers who have worked here, who have left during my tenure, who have come and gone during my tenure. But I think it's important to talk about, you know, those individuals who, you know, for whatever reason, you know, have decided to move on and you know, their career choice or their life has changed and they've decided that they need to do something else. But two of those officers, two minority officers, one who came in 2015 and came back to us in 2019, was here from 15 to 18 and then came back in 19, has moved on and taken a higher paying position with, I don't want to say better benefits, or our benefits here are great, so I'm not complaining about the benefits, but better benefits. The same thing with another minority officer who came in 16 and left in 18. And those are, you know, past individuals. You know, we now have minority individuals, and I'm happy to say I had been a very strong supporter of only hiring individuals who had already been through a post-approved academy. And there's a whole lot of reasons for that. You know, it's very costly to send someone to the academy. I know the council knows that because you see the money being, you know, sent out. But that we had such an outstanding minority candidate who had no training, who had not been through a post-approved academy, and he was such an outstanding applicant that I changed my position and sent him and another individual to the Kansas City Academy, and he is one of the most outstanding officers that we have on the street here in Raymore today, after sending both of them to the KCPD Academy. And obviously, we have just hired another minority individual who's on break-in right now, and a minority individual who's in dispatch. Again, I'm proud of the representation that we have, but I know that we can do better. And that's obviously, what we're going to be trying to do going forward. When we talk about post and what post requires as far as the training is concerned, post requires 600 hours of training for police officers in a Class A county. But nearly all of the academies, I know Kansas City, absolutely is this way, are well over 1,000 hours. And so, what the officers that we're getting that come to us have been trained in, all form or fashion of the law and defensive tactics and racial profiling and all of the things that you're going to hear me talk about a little bit further down the line.
Chief, if I could ask you, through the hiring process, it's much more laborious than where you stopped at the CVSA. That's kind of where you stopped in the process before you jump to the training part. Can you kind of explain the additional steps before the hiring actually occurs? Because I know the CVSA is on the initial application phase. There, you have other things that you do, psychologicals, things like that. If you could explain those other additional phases.
Absolutely.
Unless you were going to go ahead and talk about it later.
No, I'm happy to do it, sir. And that reminds me, because I had meant to say this back at the beginning, that Mr. Feuerborn shaking his head, that if any of you all have questions as I go through this, please, stop. Don't wait till the end. Stop me, and I'm happy to talk about those things. So yes, that part of the process that all takes place in that one day, the test, the CVSA, and the interview, is just the start of that process. Obviously, we send individuals for psychological exam. We do an extensive background investigation into all things that are involved in that individual's background, whether it's credit or being involved in criminal activity or past arrests or all of those things that might reveal themselves in a background investigation as well. Physical, drug test, all of those things that are part of the HR process that would get them to a place where we feel like they would be a good fit, that they would not bring any embarrassment to the city of Raymore, and that they can proceed in that process. And sometimes, and we've done this in the past, have made conditional offers to individuals that it looks like everything is going okay, and we're waiting for the outcome of some of those tests, but many of the individuals who process with us are processing a whole lot of other places at the same time. And so, we want to make sure that we don't lose somebody to another department, because the things that I'm talking about that are happening in Raymore are happening everywhere. Every department across the United States is suffering from the same problems of trying to find good candidates, people who want to come and be police officers, and so probably every candidate that we've had in the last several years were in some stage of the process at some other department, here locally. So, yes, sir.
I had a question on the last part about obviously their criminal background, but with them being able to be as young as 21, how far does that background go? Does that include their juvenile record as well, or is that?
Most of the time, the juvenile record is sealed, and so we are not able to gain access to those juvenile records because most of those are sealed.
So someone that maybe had a rough coming up and then they got themselves together could still be eligible.
Well, and there are certain, I've had this question asked a number of times. There are certain drugs that are automatic disqualifiers, and, you know, not only the types of drugs, but the amount of drugs taken and you know, and things like that. But all of those things either come out, you know, in an interview or background investigation or the CVSA, because obviously we ask those types of questions to make sure the individual is going to be honest with us about, you know, the things that they've engaged in, and, you know, theft from prior employers, and, you know, just a whole host of things that, you know, we want to make sure that they can meet that high standard. Sure.
Mr. Townsend?
Yes, sir.
Mayor, I had two questions to your earlier point about the recruiting and hiring portion of that. Are the officers that are leaving, minority or otherwise, are we losing them for lateral moves because they're transitioning to another department, doing the same job, the pay and benefits are better? Are we competitive in the market with respect to that? And then two, our applications or solicitations for applicants, is that beyond just our city website? You know, are we in markets that, you know, have a higher candidate pool of minority applicants? You know, how are we socializing that to gain those visibility of those candidates?
Well, in answer to the first part of your question, interestingly, no. We're not losing those individuals to other departments. We're losing them to completely out of the field of law enforcement. You know, we had an individual who left to be a dog trainer. We had an individual who became an insurance agent. We've lost a couple of individuals to Honeywell. So no, they're not leaving and going to other departments for the most part. That's the vast majority. And then secondly, we've had a conversation on a number of occasions, Mr. Icky and our HR director, Sean Auger, about how we're getting that information out. I know that we send that information out to the Missouri Peace Officers Association. So there's a number of publications that, you know, we're constantly putting the information out to folks. We do at the colleges as well, UCM and you know, those programs that have strong criminal justice graduates, and because like UCM is a good example of a school that when they graduate with a criminal justice degree, they're also post-certified. And so, you know, that's a good place, you know, and we've tried looking. Captain Wilson and I, it's been a couple years ago now, attended a job fair down at the Mohart Center down in Kansas City off of Linwood and Paseo, you know, with our booth and, you know, trying to, you know, attract candidates. And again, you know, for anyone listening, you know, I would repeat that, you know, one of the best police officers I have out there, individual where I changed my position and I sent him to the academy, paid for by us, and he has been an outstanding police officer. So no, we're not, you know, they're not going to other police departments, which is strange. You know, they're just getting out of the field altogether. I did want to tell you all before I get into, you know, talking more about training, that I know that there's been a lot of discussion, you know, throughout the country, you know, in light of everything that's going on, about reform. And you'll hear me talk a lot tonight about, you know, different things that are part of the national conversation. And one of those things is a national database to make sure that, you know, those officers who have left, you know, under a cloud, or that, you know, because of discipline, or they were about to be fired, and that sort of thing, you know, why are they able to just move, you know, from department to department, you know, without there, you know, being any record that follows them. And so, you know, I did some research, you know, with regard to that, because, you know, when you hear that conversation across the country, I think that's a great idea, because our hands are somewhat tied from time to time, you know, when somebody does come to us from another police department, and we're not able to call there and find out why that person's really leaving, because, you know, it's a, you know, privacy issue and all. But in reading up from the International Association of Directors of Law Enforcement Standards and Training, said that of the 50 states, there are 44 states that decertify police officers. So if we call them and we say, this officer did something so terrible that he needs to not be a police officer anywhere else, anytime, going forward, that post officials say that it's really difficult to track that. And so there are actually states who do that decertification process, but it's very difficult to keep up with that. And only about half of those 44 states require agencies to report that disqualifying officer conduct to post officials. But I will tell you that I know that part of the reform conversation talks about having that national database. I have applied and now have membership to the National Decertification Index, and the only downside is it's kind of labor intensive to go through it. You have to actually type in a name. You can't search by state and things like that. But certainly we're going to be using that database and that information that's available to us going forward, because we want to make sure that anybody that comes here hasn't been decertified or hasn't been fired for cause in some other place. But regardless of the academy that the individuals attend, whether it's Kansas City or Blue River or even Cass County, or even someplace outside the state, or because we have had a number of individuals who have come to us, are able to get post-certification through testing, and they've come to us from another state. Everyone that's hired in Raymore is required to participate in the 12-week field officer training program with specially selected and trained veteran police officers, and during that period of time, they're evaluated daily on their ability to master all the aspects of police work. And I will tell you, and I'll tell you just a personal story really quickly, that sometimes people excel in the academy. They do really well at all of the required modules of training, whether it's law or any of a number of other things. But it's getting out on the street when those individuals really struggle. And the story I'm going to tell is a niece of my husband who had been a dispatcher. She had been around my husband and I. She'd been around police officers growing up her whole life, and then she became a dispatcher and went through the Kansas City Academy and did really well in the academy. And when she got out on break-in, she just could not. She had no perception of danger. All of the experience that she had, either with and around law enforcement, was not able to make it as a police officer. And we've had those instances here. Mr. Fearborn can tell you that it's very painful when we make an investment in an individual, all the time and all the training, and sometimes we extend that break-in period to make sure that that individual or those individuals are given every opportunity to be successful, and sometimes they just aren't. And it is hard, and it is sad, and we have people who have said they only wanted to be a police officer their whole life, and we're telling them that they can't do it here. Now, I'll tell you, when we talk about decertification or people who maybe shouldn't be police officers, that sometimes those individuals go on to smaller departments. They go on to other places, and they are able to be successful, in other departments with less activity and things like that, or with different standards. And you will hear me say we don't apologize for our high standards, but sometimes there are just people that we don't think are a good fit in our community, and we take a pass on those individuals, but only after attempting to train them to be the police officer that we need for them to be. So after our officers are out, they're on the street, and they are functioning as a police officer, these are the requirements that our officers have every single year to maintain their certification with Post. And I think it's important to talk about how we get that training. Obviously, COVID has been a big challenge for us, making sure that we're getting all the training that we need. But probably one of the things that I was the proudest of when I came here was that all of the officers here had been trained in crisis intervention. And crisis intervention is a week-long basic class, dealing with individuals with mental health issues. And all of our officers either had been trained or were in the process of being trained. But what we hadn't done was we hadn't formalized the program. And so how, when someone comes in contact with an individual with mental health concerns, do we get them the help that they need? Because obviously they don't need to be part of the criminal justice system. They don't need to go to jail. That's not going to solve the issue. And so crisis intervention here in Raymore, as well as in Kansas City, was modeled after a program that was developed in Memphis when an individual with mental health issues was shot and killed by a police officer because they weren't able to de-escalate and handle that situation appropriately. So obviously, that basic crisis intervention training deals with significant 5 or 6 hours during that basic CIT training that deals with de-escalation. And so obviously, with all of our officers trained in crisis intervention and how to de-escalate, that's a good thing for every interaction that you have with individuals, whether it's a mental health concern or not, to be able to de-escalate a situation rather than it turn into some sort of physical confrontation and having to deal with somebody that you can't get to comply. There's also an hour of cultural diversity in that training, and as I mentioned, everyone in Raymore is trained in crisis intervention. Just really quickly, I'm going to talk about some of the other training, on top of just the 2 hours of legal, 2 hours of technical, interpersonal, skill development, and those things. All of the training, the types of training that our officers are getting all the time, because we never want to miss an opportunity to train. And as I mentioned, COVID was really unique for us. We weren't sending people out for training. We were having to do a lot of that training online, but didn't want to miss, again, the opportunity to train. So obviously lots of training in COVID, ethics in law enforcement, all officers in 2020, officer tactical training in de-escalation techniques and crisis intervention, all officers in 2020, emerging legal trends, all officers in 2020, diversity and inclusion, all officers in 2019, racial profiling updates, civil unrest, leadership for challenging times, racial profile, implicit bias policy training, applied leadership principles for all of the first-line supervisors, diversity in the workplace, implicit and explicit policing and racial profiling, fair and impartial policing, police stress and critical incidents, non-bias policing, de-escalation and responding in a mental health crisis, fair and impartial policing, training of trainers. And I mentioned a lot of that we were able to do online, but we've also assigned all of our officers training that has to be completed by July 31st. In the following topics: anti-bias training for law enforcement, child abuse and neglect, community policing, hate crimes training for law enforcement, arrest, search, and seizure, Fourth Amendment awareness, officer wellness, and mental health awareness. And then Cass County is actually hosting training that we're going to try and send all of our folks to, which is understanding implicit bias training. So you see that we're training our folks. We're trying to make sure that our folks are exposed to that training all the time, and I'm pleased that that's important to our people. They're constantly constantly coming to us, looking for the opportunities to attend training, obviously before COVID, but to attend those trainings and to go to places where they feel like they can be exposed to other sides of policing. Yes, sir.
How often does our training include some actual, for lack of a better term, case studies of issues that may have happened within our city to help supplement that training? It says, okay, based on this incident, whether good or bad, how it was handled, this is how we probably should have handled it, and do we use that to kind of augment or supplement and augment that training that these police officers take?
The supervisors do all the time. And when I talk about, when I read off this rather lengthy list of the training that our folks go to, that doesn't even scratch the surface of the training that's going on all the time, with our supervisors, because every opportunity is a training opportunity. When, an officer, because our sergeants are out there making those calls with the police officers all the time. And if they see that someone perhaps misspoke or could have handled a situation better, that's always a training opportunity. And you will see on the field training forms are called DORs, they're daily observation reports. And on the DORs, what the field training officer is doing is documenting how many minutes or hours a day are spent training, to make sure that, if the officer, the recruit officer, perhaps could have handled an interaction with a citizen better, then they spend that time training about, okay, what are we going to do different next time? And then that carries over from the field training to obviously the everyday interaction, with the supervisor. As far as the training that we're taking either online, I will tell you that the tactical training that I mentioned that deals with de-escalation, they were all the videos and everything that was part of that, because that training is NPR. So it's provided to us through Local GovU, and it's NPR, so it is local information that's given to us. But it was de-escalation and crisis intervention within the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department, so lots of folks that were familiar to me. But we're not using those examples per se in the training, but I do know that, once our folks have gone through the training, that we spend a lot of time at shift change, roll call, talking about, the calls of the day and talking about the training that the officers have been, because, they're talking about how, that mental health call would apply to this individual that they may be having difficulty dealing with. So not so much in the formalized training, but certainly in those everyday conversations. Sure. Okay, I'm going to share with you, and one of the important things that I need to tell you about these policies and procedures is that this policy, the Raymore Police Department Policy Manual, has 41 distinct chapters within the policy manual that are all public record for the most part. The only parts of the manual that are not available for viewing by the public are those operational policies and procedures that deal with specific methods or tactics or strategies of police response or tactical actions that would compromise the safety of the community or the safety of the officer if those things were revealed. So what I've done here is I've highlighted some of the individual policies that, probably would be of particular interest to you, because they sort of get at the heart of what we believe as police officers and the things that we live by, like the rules of conduct. And those are all available for public viewing. So, and just by the same token that these policies would probably be of interest to you because of what they deal with, they're of particular interest to us because, we feel like these are the places where, we have the greatest opportunity for someone, perhaps to have difficulty. If there's going to be something that's high risk, these situations, fall in these policies like the rules of conduct or discipline. And discipline always has such a negative connotation, but actually in our policy, it's self-discipline. It's making sure that you're doing your job the right way and that you're handling yourself in an appropriate manner as well. So again, I mentioned that these policies are all open record and are all available for viewing if anyone is interested. One of the policies is obviously our Code of Conduct, and the Code of Conduct has 50 separate subsections in the policy that covers everything from confidentiality to officer integrity to cooperating with the community, with each other, with other agencies. And in the section under the performance of duties in our Code of Conduct, the policy states, an officer shall perform all duties impartially, without favor, affection, or ill will, and without regard to status, sex, race, religion, political belief, sexual orientation, or national origin. All citizens will be treated equally with courtesy, consideration, and dignity. But I have to tell you all that this isn't just a policy. Obviously, our officers are required during that field training, and then periodically, all the time, we are going back and reviewing sections of the policy. But the words that I just read, aren't just a policy for our officers. It's a belief that we practice every day, that our officers are here to treat everyone with the appropriate amount of respect and make sure that they get the highest level of service each and every day, not just because it's in our policy, but because that's what we believe. Another section of our policy deals with racial profiling, and our racial profiling policy has 7 sections. You can see here that those are the subsections within the racial profiling policy. And this policy basically mirrors the revised statute of the state of Missouri 590.650. And what it does is it gives us all the definitions, the purpose, the procedures, the annual report, and all of the information that allow us to operate within the guidelines of the state with regard to racial profiling. Our officers gather data on every single stop we make, whether it's a call for service, a car check for suspicious activity, or a traffic violation. By statute, we're required to provide all of the data we gather in a report to the State Attorney General that's due in March every year for the previous year. One of the difficulties for us in reporting is the population used for comparison and disparity is based on the driving population found in the 2010 census. And so, once you get to 2018, 2019, the information is really dated, by then. And so we're trying to make, the appropriate comparisons and make sure that, we're watching for any red flags and those things. We're basing that on fairly dated information. Each year when we submit our data, we're also allowed to provide a letter of explanation. And in that letter of explanation, which we have always taken advantage of, some agencies don't, we believe it provides us the opportunity to further explain our changing demographics. And so what I'm able to say in that letter to the Attorney General is that, Raymore's population has grown by this much, and, we now, have a big box, when Sam's Club moved down from Grandview, we now have, a fairly transient population coming and going, in and out of Raymore, and I feel like, it's important for us to, at least explain if there's some additional information about our community that the Attorney General's office can use. And that report, and I would encourage anyone to go look at the complete report, because it's not just Raymore, obviously. It's all of the communities all throughout the state of Missouri that shows the disparity index. It shows, all of the information. It has the explanation for the cities that choose to do so, and provides that information about what cities across the state of Missouri are doing with regard to racial profiling. So I would encourage folks to go there. And again, if anyone's interested in seeing or reading that policy, you're welcome to as well. Next
Mr.
policy.
Circo?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a question when we talked of racial profiling. I noticed we went back for the 24 years annual that they have to do, the 24 hours annual. Everything was 2-2. We had elective at 16, but we had 1 hour for racial profiling. I don't know if it's feasible to move an elective into racial profiling, like 2 hours. Do we have the 2 hours for every process for that annual? The racials at 1 instead of 2, and maybe take an elective. I don't know if that's possible.
Well,
How the
and
house
we,
set up.
we do way above and beyond what's required by the state. But yeah, those were required, those are the state requirements. And that 1 hour of racial profiling, which is required by the state, is above and beyond the electives. But we choose to go way beyond that, as you could tell by the list that I read. We don't just do the hour that's required by the state. So we can, and probably what you would see, if I were to give you the training record any individual in the department, you would see that there were multiple hours of racial profiling, but they are being used as electives, just as you say. Sure. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
Chief, I wanted you to touch on something that obviously I'm aware of and you're aware of. We use the term racial profiling, and that term in and of itself sounds horrible, but it actually, the policy itself states that there will be no racial profiling. An officer shall not, will not stop or make any type of arrest or law enforcement action based on a person's color, creed, ethnicity, sexual orientation, et cetera, et cetera. That term was dictated by the feds in the state some years ago, and it's kind of stuck. I know they actually changed the term of, the term of the course a few years ago to fair and unbiased policing, but it's all still basically the same content. And what they do each year in the training, correct me if I'm wrong, they show a lot of the stats for both the state and the locality that you work in as far as the numbers of people that are stopped or contacted by law enforcement, by race, by sex, et cetera, and they give the officers a reminder that thou shalt not. And so I just thought I might bring that up for people who are not familiar with the term.
Thank you. So let me talk a little bit about response to resistance, and I'll start off telling you that when I came here, we changed, and the term, much like Councilman Holman says, sometimes it's just the terminology that, folks get hung up on, that it had always been called use of force. And the reports were titled use of force, everyone called it use of force. But we changed here, and you've seen it all across the country, to a response to resistance. And the explanation for that is that it would imply, much like with racial profiling, that we are randomly using force on individuals, depending on the circumstances. And the truth of the matter is that any level of force that we are using is a response to the resistance of the individual who's being arrested. And so, again, I would encourage folks to take a look at the policy. There's 25 separate sections, subsections in the response to resistance policy, because it's a very high risk and very complicated issue. Everything from the types of force, definitions of the levels of resistance, both on the part of the subject being arrested, and then the level of force used by the officer, to try and provide that guidance and very strict guideline for the officers to follow in those types of situations. Because usually when an individual resists arrest and an officer is called upon to provide some level of force, it can be a really dangerous and really rapidly evolving situation. And so, we want those officers, you hear people talk about muscle memory when you're training people, and we want those officers, we want that to be automatic, that they are going to respond in such a way that it goes to their training. The police department obviously, above all else, values the safety of the public and our officers, and so the policy is very clear about officers are only able to use that level of force that's reasonable under the circumstances, and only the level of force necessary to accomplish their lawful objectives, and that's wording straight out of the policy. So the use of lethal and less lethal force can only be used by officers in the manner set forth in the policy. Those definitions of control, force, and reasonableness, and especially those levels of resistance by a person being arrested as opposed to the level of control that's available for use by the officer. So the level of control used by the officer is only that for which they've been trained. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about the things that we don't train our people on and the things that are not available to our officers, because you've heard a lot around the country about chokeholds, and I am going to talk about that here in just a little bit. But We complete a response to resistance report every time, and I know Rachel's here. I'm going to say thank you to Rachel for helping us update our report. We'll fill out this report anytime physical force is used to overcome resistance by an arrestee, utilization of wrist locks, empty hand techniques and handcuffing, OC spray, baton used, taser used, firearm used. We complete a report, or the officer completes this report each and every time. And I think it's important to let you all know that this report, and this certainly wasn't the case, where I came from Kansas City, but this report is reviewed by every single individual in the person's chain of command. And so the first line supervisor reviews this report to make sure that the force was appropriate. Then the lieutenant reviews it, the captain reviews it, and it comes to the chief, and I review it. And so this information and the person's actions, the officer's actions, are reviewed by every single person in the chain of command to make sure that the force applied was appropriate. Does the person need training? Is it inappropriate? Do they need discipline? And so each and every one of these, and I can tell you, and I'm not, Kansas City's the only other department I know, and so I'm certainly not talking bad about Kansas City, but there's no way with the volume of incidents that happen in Kansas City that those reports are going much higher than the first line supervisor. Is about the only place that these reports go. And they go all the way to the chief here in Raymore. And we also keep that information in a spreadsheet. And so, back since, I think 2008 is when we started, or maybe 2006, we keep that information, officer name, date, case report number, and we keep all the reports. Obviously, we have all those, but I'm able to look at the spreadsheet and determine patterns of behavior and those kinds of things, to make sure, as we're looking at the officers who have more force incidents than maybe others, that we're able to track that information in that spreadsheet. That's just the second half of that report, and you can see, as I mentioned, goes all the way through the chain of command and comes to me. And so I read each and every one of them and the associated reports, and most times, as a matter of fact, all the times, all the reports, if they were dispatched on a stealing at Walmart, or and they had to fight the person that was being arrested, there is usually video attached, and so we review the videos, we review all the reports that go with them, and obviously this report as well. Anybody have any questions about this? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chief. Is this self-reporting, or is the?
Yes.
Okay, so the arresting officer submits this report, does another officer submit on their behalf, or is it pretty much
No,
self-reporting?
the arresting officer submits this report, and the vast majority of the time, if it's a response to resistance, there's more than one officer involved. And so if a second officer uses some level of force, one officer may pepper spray, or one officer may just use a wrist lock to try and get someone to comply. The other person, ends up using pepper spray. So each one of them prepare their own report for the type of force that they use. I mentioned earlier about discipline, and this is just the opening statement in our discipline policy. And when I mentioned before that, discipline is just as much about self-discipline and making sure that our officers are conducting themselves in a manner that brings, great credit to our city and to our organization. But there's been a lot of discussion, and the reason that I included this in my presentation tonight is because there's been a lot of discussion throughout the country about duty to act. And you see in a lot of reform discussion, about George Floyd and why didn't someone act to keep that from happening. And I certainly would support any and all language that provided a duty to act on behalf of our police officers. because I don't want our officers to ever remain silent if someone's not acting inappropriately in any form or fashion, whether it's, someone's life is in danger or in any other way. But I wanted to bring at least this portion of our existing policy to your attention, because I think even though the terminology duty to act is not present in this policy, I believe that it's the spirit of this policy that we want to make sure that not only supervisors, but fellow officers will make sure that any inappropriate behavior is being reported regardless of what it deals with. And so I know that there could potentially be down the road duty to act language, which I'm happy to support, because I think that we should never remain silent if our fellow officers are putting somebody's life in danger, or acting inappropriately in a manner that is not befitting to what we believe in here. Anybody have any questions about? I included this. This is the Personnel Incident Report form, which actually I stole from Kansas City. It was instituted not long after I arrived in 2012. As you can see from the form, it allows the supervisor to document a violation of policy or multiple violations on one form. And the outcome of the PIR ranges from training to verbal or written reprimand, suspension with loss of pay, all the way up to termination if the violation is serious enough. Mr. Fearborn usually sees these, but we do not hesitate to discipline our officers, because we feel like, sometimes it takes that disciplinary action to make sure that they understand that their actions can't be tolerated. Okay, now I'm going to talk about equipment. What I'm going to say first is what we do have. Obviously, you all have seen in recent weeks and months the exterior vest carrier. We recognized that it had been a health issue for our officers for a number of years, carrying all that equipment around their waist. So we worked hard for a look that was not tactical or militaristic, because one of the things that we were the most concerned about was what was seen in Ferguson when those tactical officers were deployed with the tactical-looking vests, that it escalated the situation, and we wanted to make sure that that was not the case. And so we worked hard for something that looked like it was part of the uniform. Our officers carry batons, oleoresin capsicum spray or pepper spray, a taser, a handgun, a patrol rifle, and all of the officers are trained and certified to use each piece of that equipment that we carry. We also have in-house staff instructors that have attended Train the Trainer courses to provide that annual or biennial recertification for our officers on every single piece of that equipment. So in addition to sending our officers out for defensive tactics training and those sorts of things, we also have in-house instructors who have been trained to do that recertification. We also obviously have mutual aid, and some of you probably are familiar that we have two of our department members who are on the Cass County Tactical Team, and those individuals use gas for entry, into houses where hostages are present and that sort of thing. But we don't have our own tactical team here, obviously. What we don't use is we don't use beanbags, we don't use rubber bullets, we don't use chokeholds or LVNR, which is the lateral vascular neck restraint that you hear. And I will tell you all, I went to the academy in Kansas City. I was trained on it, so I know how to do an LVNR, but we don't do it here. We don't train on it. It's not in our policy. We don't allow it. So you will hear people make the distinction between the chokehold and the LVNR, and we don't do either here. We don't shoot at moving cars. We don't use pepper balls or gas foggers. And we don't use body cameras, and I'm going to talk about that just for a minute. I'm a real supporter of this technology. I think body cameras are great, and most of you will remember that we wear tested body cameras several different models of body cameras before we made a presentation to the council. And I still firmly believe in the value of body cameras and the use of body cameras, but there are still issues that I personally have that I don't think have been resolved, at least not to my satisfaction. When to turn it on, what types of calls, do you leave it running continuously, the storage of the data, and probably most importantly for me is the right to privacy issue. I know departments all across the United States have not resolved the issue of, and here in the state of Missouri, we have the Sunshine Law, and if, I come to your house and that camera, is fully operating and there's some sort of domestic disturbance, in your house, and your neighbor decides they want to see what happened at your house, they could give us a sunshine request and get the video, potentially get the video from the police being inside your private residence. And one of the things that I said to the council back a long time ago when we talked about body cameras was I don't want to have the city foot the bill for a very expensive piece of technology, which I think is a great piece of technology, only to have it sit on the shelf because I haven't resolved those issues about how to protect the privacy of the residents of Raymore. And so, I never want to be on record as saying that I don't think the body cameras are great. I know that, our dash cam video provides us great information. And so I think that the body cameras would do the same thing. If someone comes out with a best practice that says this is how we do it and this is how we protect the community, then I will absolutely be in support of that. I will say, and this is strictly my opinion, I know that there's been a lot of concern, or at least a lot of opinions expressed about the removal of some of the tools that we talked about, pepper spray and tasers and things like that, because any tool can be abused. Any tool can be abused. But I feel strongly that if you take away some of those additional tools, that every interaction or every confrontation going forward will become a gunfight. And if the officers don't have those additional tools available to them, you just have to, I just have to, as a chief, make sure that those people are using those tools appropriately rather than inappropriately, so that the officer's only available tool is a handgun, because we don't want that to happen. We want to make sure that they have those other tools available to them. I know there's been a lot of conversation, and certainly people have watched the news about officer-involved shootings. Agencies like Kansas City have been criticized about investigating their own officer-involved shootings. We don't here. Raymore officer-involved shootings are investigated and have always been, I think, probably. The mayor can speak to that, but certainly since I've been here, investigated by outside agencies, generally the Missouri State Highway Patrol or the Kansas City shooting team. We have been in conversations and a number of meetings with other Cass County agencies about the formation of a shooting team here. And so what would happen, and it's modeled after what a number of other counties around the metropolitan area do, Johnson County on the Kansas side, Clay and Platte north of the river, where small agencies band together, and then if a shooting happens in one of their jurisdictions, all of the other agencies, send people to investigate that shooting and not the agency where the person was involved. Some of you all may remember our last shooting that happened was on Valentine's Day, and it was really complicated because obviously Raymore fired shots, the Highway Patrol fired shots, the Cass County Sheriff's Department fired shots, and so very difficult to find somebody to come and investigate, where there was, a number of people involved in that. But we're still working on it, and, certainly, still have the promise of those agencies who we have mutual aid agreements with, that they're going to send somebody if we have the need. We hope we don't have the need. Just wanted to,
Mr. Burke, did you have
oh, I'm
something?
sorry. Yes, sir.
I had a question. This is maybe two-part good and bad. I've got a couple friends that are police officers other places, and they provide their own personal body cams that they back up the data and everything, which I think is good for them. But at the same side, could officers here voluntarily have tools that they use that they haven't been trained on by our department, and that would that be frowned upon? Would that be?
I would not, and I'm not going to be the chief forever, but I would not allow, I do not allow anyone to use a tool that's not authorized by me and that our people haven't been trained on. And that even involves off-duty weapons. Police officers, many police officers carry a different gun off-duty, when they're not, working on duty. And they're not even allowed to do that unless I authorize it and they go to the firing range and are trained and certified on that weapon. So I can safely say that I wouldn't allow people to use something that had not been previously approved and that they hadn't been trained on.
I appreciate that response.
Sure. Sort of in closing, I just wanted to talk about community outreach and the things that, that I've probably enjoyed most about my job since coming here 8 years ago, is, being back in the community and being back, out with, the people that make up our community. And so I just want to talk a little bit about some of the programs, obviously, that we do here all the time. Our Citizens Police Academy, Youth Court, Shop with a Cop, which is annual, Coffee with a Cop, which you see down there in one of the corners, multiple events, our Community Against Crime event, which we're thinking about doing anyway, even if the Fall Festival has been postponed, our Ride-Along program, Crime Prevention through Environmental Design, and our Business Security presentations, our School Youth Community Outreach Officer, our Drug Take-Back that we do twice a year, our annual vaccination and microchip event. During COVID, we did about 70 birthday parades, which is a lot of fun. The Forever Bike program that we do in partnership with Walmart, where we take the bikes that have been in our property room, and Walmart helps us renovate those, and they're given out to kids all throughout Cass County. Our HOA and topic-specific town hall meetings that we participate in, our bicycle safety rodeo, driver's training, and we have, I encourage all of you all to come and try the impaired, the driver-impaired bike. I actually had a picture of Mr. Fearborn on it, but we couldn't squeeze it into my presentation. The annual Crisis Intervention Conference and Mid-America Crisis Intervention Council, of which Lieutenant Abdelgawad is a member. So, we are constantly making sure that our officers receive that advanced, I talk about basic CIT training, but that advanced training that deals with youth and deals with veterans and other special needs populations all throughout our community. And then lastly, I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to the community for your overwhelming support, and thank you for your willingness to have the tough conversation and to listen to what we have to say. And then secondly, thank you to Mr. Fearborn and the City Council for all of your support throughout the years to make sure that our officers have state-of-the-art equipment and extensive training in the very best practices in law enforcement, which enable us to serve our community better. So that's all I have.
Does anyone from the council have anything for the chief? Any questions? Mr. Barber?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a comment. Chief, great job.
Thank you.
Very comprehensive. Appreciate it. You got a great department from, I'm not going to say top to bottom, because I'm going to say side to side. You have a fantastic department. But I would like to make a comment on the Citizens Academy. I know in years past, you've had trouble even getting enough citizens to have a full, you've had to cancel a few. I realize now with COVID, it kind of makes it difficult right at this time. But I would hope that after we get past this, that our citizens would take advantage of that, because most of what you went through here, even more deeply, goes through the Citizens Academy. You really understand what an officer is going through every day. I mean, you do a great job of doing that. So I would ask our citizens that are concerned, once we do get past this, that those academies get filled up and we get people taking advantage of that. So, thank you.
Thank you, sir, and I will tell you that our officers love doing that. When we have the Citizens Academy and everybody all throughout the department, whether it's communications or animal control or the detectives, they really enjoy telling people about their jobs. And so I never am at a loss for department people volunteering to participate in presenting to the Citizens Academy.
Mr. Holman?
Thank you, sir. Chief, I would concur with Councilmember Barber's comments. I think and have thought for some time that we have a top-notch, incredible police department here, and we're lucky to have you. I would remind everyone again that our police department received a 100% satisfaction rating in our latest survey, which is less than a year old. That's incredible. I don't think you could find a comparable city around that could boast those kinds of marks. That's great when people say those kinds of things and feel that way about our police department, especially when public safety is probably one of the three #1 reasons most cited by our residents as reasons for being here or locating here, that along with good schools and available housing. I would ask you this question, although I think you've already answered it, but I'll give you my opinion and see if you have anything to add to it. So my question would be, what's different here? Now, you've given us all kinds of good reasons. You have great people. You have great policies and procedures. You have a redundancy backup. Check everything. Make sure people are doing the right thing. But I would say it goes, to me, Chief, farther than that. It goes to the intangible things that are difficult to capture at your desk or anybody else's. For example, a couple of years ago, I was at the Harvest Night with a group that Mr. Jones and I put together, doing a dance routine with the kids while they were taking the rides on the haunted trail and so forth. And Officer Giacconi was there. And as opposed to just sitting in his car, driving around, or walking around, he actually just sat down at one of the picnic tables and just had conversations with people. You know, they knew who he was. They knew his name. And they felt like he's part of the community as opposed to the officer who's here. On the 4th of July, one of the officers responded over to my neighborhood to an elderly gentleman who lives across the street from me, and he's kind of housebound, and he was convinced that people were shooting fireworks at his home. That officer got out of his car, took time to go inside and meet with him, walked his yard, and told him there's no debris out here. He goes, I think just what you're hearing is people's tenacity and their desire to get out of the house from COVID-19. They're shooting off lots of fireworks, and it's very, very loud. And I spoke to the officer, and he goes, I like this guy. I've dealt with him before. He goes, I understand where he's coming from. I thought that was a powerful statement. He goes, and it's understandable. If I were in that situation, I would feel the same way. So that, to me, is what's different here in Raymore. I would be interested to know if you concur or if you have something additional.
Well, I don't think I can say it better than you've already said it, but I think that it is that. We all recognize, you all better than anyone recognize how this community is growing. And you know, business development is good, you know, residential development is good, but we've managed to maintain kind of a small town feel and manage to, and yes, our officers do, you know, despite our growing population, you know, I'm able to sit with the officers at shift change, and they're talking about those people that they're looking out for, and that's one of the absolute tenets of the crisis intervention program is making sure that, you know those individuals who may need just a little extra checking on, and all of our folks are so good at that. And I one of my favorite things to do, if I'm not in the room with them at shift change, is to sit in my office when the day shift is leaving and the night shift is coming on, and to sit and listen to them interact with each other. And they love their jobs. They love their jobs. And so it was harder, you know, in a bigger department to feel that every day. And so I think that that's what's different, that every single one of those people don't have to be here, but they love being here.
Thank you, Chief.
Anyone else? Mr. Circo?
Yeah, Chief, I kind of want to touch on a couple things. One, like you said, the coffee for the cops. I went around when they do that and make sure I interact and talk to all of them. I wish everybody would because they're very interesting people. They'll want to ask you, they want to hear from you, they want to answer any questions you have. It's a great thing. I try to make sure every time I see one of my officers drive, I always wave at them. I tell my people all the time when I was in insurance, wave at all your officers. Let them know you care about them. They're important. And I guess a touch on the ride-along. You think you know what the police do. You've kind of seen it for years. You think you understand it. But when I went on my ride-along, what I saw, the professionalism, the training, the experience, the understanding, that is way above what you would think. They're not just normal people. Police officers are normal when they go home, but when they're on duty, they're so intense. They know where their area with daytime or nighttime. They know where they're at. They run it every shift. They know the houses. They know the people. They know. They're so honed in, and they're right there. I mean, you wouldn't believe. I mean, these guys are like AI. I mean, they are so good at what they do. So I encourage people when this is all over, get out in a daytime or an evening run with an officer. Ride with them. Ask them questions. You'll find out there's a lot more goes on in that patrol car than you can ever imagine when they're driving around doing their regular job for you. They're awesome. They're really good.
Well, and they enjoy that too, and so thank you, because the officers enjoy having ride-alongs. They enjoy telling people about what their job is and what it entails, and lots of times it's boring because it's reports and it's, there's not a lot of excitement going on, but they enjoy telling people what they do every day.
Anybody else? If no one has anything else, we'll stand adjourned for this evening. Thank you all for participating. Thank the audience for being here with us tonight. I'm sure if you have any additional questions for the chief, she'd be happy to answer them for you offline or via email, whatever. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you.